There are things you cannot apologize your way out of. Not because the person you hurt refuses to forgive you. Maybe they do, eventually, in whatever private way forgiveness works. But because the moment they saw the truth about who you are, they made a decision. And people who make that kind of decision don't announce it. They just quietly, methodically start removing themselves from your reach. My brother was like that. And for years I told myself he was being cruel. It took me a long time to understand that what he was actually doing was surviving. I was 26 when everything fell apart. My brother was 30. He and his common-law partner Tamsin had been together for 7 years by then. They had a 4-year-old daughter named Molly, and a semi-detached house in East Toronto. With a leaky basement they'd been meaning to fix since they moved in. They weren't married on paper, but they were married in every way that counted. Shared mortgage, shared RRSP contributions, shared parental leave when Molly was born. My brother was the kind of person who showed up. That was the simplest and most honest thing I can say about him. He showed up. To family dinners, to help days, to the hospital when our father had his gallbladder out. He was the one who remembered things and followed through. I was not that kind of person. I don't say that to be self-pitying about it. I say it because it's important to understand the pattern before you understand the collapse. I was the younger one. I was the one who could charm my way out of a bad situation. Our parents, I understand this now, though I refused to for a long time, made different investments in us. My brother got expectations. I got excuses. He was responsible at 17 because we all assumed he would be. I was forgiven at 23 for things that would have ended his standing in the family permanently. Nobody said this out loud. These things never get said out loud. They just accumulate, silently, like water damage inside a wall. The affair with Tamsin started at a cottage weekend in Muskoka the summer before it all came apart. My brother had stayed home with Molly. She'd had an ear infection and he didn't want to pass her off to our parents for the weekend. Tamsin went with the rest of us. I'm not going to dress this up in circumstances to make myself sound less responsible. We made choices, both of us, several times over the course of 4 months. I told myself it wasn't serious. I told myself it was complicated. I told myself a lot of things that I was very good at believing. Because I had a lifetime of practice, believing convenient things about myself. Then Tamsin called me one afternoon in March and said she was pregnant and didn't know whose it was. I remember the sound of traffic outside my apartment window. I remember afternoon light coming through the blinds. I remember saying something useless, like okay. As if she'd told me a fact about the weather. She cried. I didn't know what to do with someone crying, so I said I needed to think. Then I hung up. And then I called my mother. I should have called my brother. I know that. I have never stopped knowing that. But calling my brother would have meant having a conversation I was not ready to have. A conversation that would require me to say true things about myself. In a direct and undefended way. Calling my mother meant. I understood this instinctively, without consciously framing it. That someone else would help me manage the situation. My mother drove to my apartment that evening. She sat at my kitchen table with her coat still on and she listened. And when I finished she said, we need to think about this carefully. Not, call your brother. Not, this is going to destroy him. Not, you thinking, just, we need to think about this carefully. And I felt in that moment, a horrible relief. Like a child who's broken something and finds out the adults are going to quietly sweep it up before anyone else notices. My father found out 2 days later. He was quieter about it. He looked at me for a long time and then said, you understand what this would do to your brother? Not a question. I nodded. He said, we need to handle this the right way. I still don't fully know what he meant by the right way. I think he meant a way that didn't require us to tell my brother. We didn't tell my brother. For 6 weeks we didn't tell him. My mother spoke to Tamsin twice. I don't know exactly what was said, but I know the words think about Molly came up. I know the phrase this doesn't have to come out was used. I know that Tamsin was pressured, gently and with love, to make a decision that would keep the surface of things intact. And I let it happen. I was in those conversations in spirit even when I wasn't on the phone. I was the reason my mother was making them. Tamsin told my brother herself on a Tuesday evening in April, while Molly was at nursery school. I wasn't there. I found out when my brother called me 2 hours later. He didn't say hello, he said, did they know? His voice was flat in a way I had never heard before. Not angry. Flat, like something had been removed from it. I couldn't answer. How long? He asked. I said, about 6 weeks. He didn't yell. He didn't swear. He exhaled slowly, the way a person does when they're trying to keep their hands from shaking. Then he said, I have to go. And he hung up. We gathered at my parents' house that weekend. My brother arrived last. He sat down in the living room in the armchair that used to be our grandfather's. The one nobody really sat in, that just existed as a piece of furniture we moved around, and he looked at each of us in turn. Not with anger. With something quieter. Like, he was studying something he was about to set down for the last time. My father spoke first. He said this was a difficult situation, and that nobody's hands were entirely clean, and that there was a child in the picture. 2 children potentially. And that what mattered now was figuring out the best path forward for everyone involved. He used the phrase move forward. 3 times. I know because I counted, and I'm still not sure why I was counting except that. Some part of me understood. Even then, that those words were going to matter. My brother let him finish. Then he looked at my father and said, move forward. Not a question. My father said, for Molly's sake, for the sake of the family. You're angry and you have every right to be, but I have every right to be, my brother repeated. Quiet, exact. My mother said, we love you. We're not excusing what happened. We thought we were protecting you. He turned to look at her, for 6 weeks? She said, yes. He nodded slowly, like he was storing something. Then he looked at me, and I want to say I said something real, something that came from a place of actual accountability, but I didn't. I sat there and looked back at him and said nothing. Because I was still, even in that moment, more focused on surviving the scene than on the person in front of me, who was being hollowed out by it. My brother stood up. He said, the 2 people in this room I trusted most, spent 6 weeks making sure I stayed in the dark, and now you want me to move forward. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. I'm going to go be with my daughter. My mother stood up. Don't do something drastic. Let's talk about this. He paused at the door. He didn't turn around. He said, I'm just going to be with Molly. And then he left. Tamsin and my brother worked out custody privately, without lawyers. Molly was his, legally and in every practical sense. Tamsin was in no state to take primary custody, and she didn't try. She moved to Hamilton and got an apartment there. My brother and Molly stayed in the house for 8 more weeks. Long enough for him to find a new position through his company. He worked in infrastructure project management. The kind of work that can transfer across provinces with the right opportunity. And then he was gone. British Columbia. We found out through his work's auto-response on email, which said he was no longer with that regional office. We found out the province through a mutual cousin, who had bumped into someone who knew someone. We did not find out the city. We did not find out the neighborhood. We did not find out anything my brother had not chosen to tell us, which was nothing at all. My parents called. His number was disconnected. They emailed. No response. They tried through the cousin. Nothing. I did not try. I told myself it was because I was giving him space. The truth is I didn't know how to start. Because starting would have required me to begin with an honest account of what I'd done. And I was still not ready to hold that account in my own hands and look at it directly. Tamsin and I had a son. He was born in November 7 months after my brother left. We named him Leo. Tamsin and I were not together. That was never a realistic version of things. But I was at the hospital. I held him. I felt something I had never felt before. A kind of terrible and uncomplicated love that did not depend on what I had done or who I was. Leo was 8 pounds, 3 ounces. And he looked like a red, squinting, perfect stranger. I drove home that night and sat in my parking garage for 40 minutes because I could not figure out how to move. I tried to be a good father. I think I was in the limited and partial way that is available to people who are still, at that point, primarily managing themselves. I paid support. I showed up for visits. I brought him to Tim Hortons and let him pick the Timbits. Which felt like something a proper dad did. Even though I understood intellectually that parenting was not a series of performances, but an accumulation of mundane, invisible choices made when no one was watching. My mother started getting the photos when Molly turned 5. A card in December every year postmarked from different post offices. Vancouver 1 year, Kelowna the next, Victoria the year after. Inside a single printed photo, no note, no return address, just Molly. The first one. Molly standing on a hiking trail, wearing a yellow raincoat, grinning so wide her cheeks were scrunched up. She had my brother's nose. She always had his nose, even as a baby. My mother put it on the refrigerator and cried for an hour. The second year. Molly in front of a snow-covered tree, holding a paper snowflake she must have made herself. 8 points, slightly uneven, clearly done by a 5 or 6-year-old's hands. I stared at that photo for a long time. When Molly was 3, before everything, I used to babysit her sometimes on Saturday afternoons. We made paper snowflakes together because she liked cutting paper, and I had no idea how to entertain a 3-year-old, but I owned scissors. She called them the fancy stars. I had completely forgotten that until I saw her holding one in that photo. I went out to my car after seeing it, and I just sat there, not crying. Just sitting. Something had opened up and I didn't know what to do with the space it left. My parents said they were sure he would reach out eventually. They said Molly would bring him back. They said things that were based entirely on what they needed to be true. rather than what was actually true. I stopped correcting them after a while. It felt cruel. They were getting older. And they were doing the thing people do. When they've made mistakes they can no longer outrun. They bargained with time. They told themselves there was still time. Leo was 5 when he asked me why he didn't have an uncle. I'd thought about this question coming. I'd rehearsed a version of it. I'd planned to say something about how some families are complicated. And how his uncle lived very far away. And how distance didn't mean love wasn't there. I had a whole reasonable sounding framework prepared. What actually came out was, he lives in BC. Leo considered this. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating a bowl of cereal. And he had milk on his chin. And he was completely serious, in the way 5-year-olds are serious when they're actually trying to understand something. He said, "Did you do something wrong?" I put down my coffee. "Why do you ask that?" I said. He shrugged. "Because you make that face when you talk about him. Like when I broke your headphones and you asked me what happened." I looked at my son, 5 years old, milk on his chin, already better at reading my face than I had ever been at reading myself. "Yeah," I said. "I did something wrong." He nodded. "Are you going to fix it?" I didn't know how to answer that. I said, "I'm trying to figure out how." He went back to his cereal. "Okay," he said. And that was the end of the conversation for him. But it wasn't the end for me. I sat at that table after he left the room. And I thought about what it meant to still be figuring out how 7 years later. I thought about the paper snowflake photo on my mother's fridge. I thought about the fact that my brother had quietly changed their last name. I'd found that out through the mutual cousin who'd spotted it on a soccer registration in an online community board. And that Molly was growing up on the other side of the country, under a name she'd chosen with her father, and I had contributed to the reason for that. I wrote my brother a letter, not an email. A letter on paper which felt like the right kind of slow. I wrote 6 drafts. The first 5 all contained some version of explaining myself, which is different from apologizing. Explaining is about making the other person understand you, and apology is about acknowledging what you caused. In the 6th draft, I tried to do only the second thing. I wrote, "I know what I did. I know what our parents did. I know that what we called protecting the family was actually protecting ourselves. I don't need you to forgive me. I don't need anything from you. I just needed to say it out loud to you directly. Because I've been saying it only to myself for 7 years. And that doesn't count." I sent it through the mutual cousin, who had eventually found a way to reach my brother. Through a professional network connection. 3 months passed. Then an email came from an address I didn't recognize. He wrote, "I got your letter. I read it a few times. I think you mean it. I also think you still don't completely understand what you cost me. Not just Tamsin, not just the house, but the version of my life I had been building. The trust. The assumption that the people closest to me were actually on my side. You and our parents took 7 years of my life and handed them to me with a question mark in the middle. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it is to Heshim. And because the letter you wrote was about what you needed to say. This is what I need you to know. Don't come here. Don't reach out through other people again. If I ever decide I want to talk, I'll initiate it." I read it 4 times. I showed it to no one. I folded up the printed copy and put it in the back of a desk drawer. My father had a cardiac event the following winter, not a full heart attack, but close enough that the cardiologist in Scarborough used the word warning 3 times during the consultation. He came home quieter than I had ever seen him. He asked me, after a few days, if I had heard anything from my brother. I told him about the email. I let him read it. He sat with it for a long time. Then he said he's right, and nothing else. That was, I think, the most honest thing my father ever said to me about the whole situation. It didn't fix anything. But it was the first time I felt like we were both looking at the same thing, instead of 2 separate, more comfortable versions of it. I wrote once more to my brother the following spring. Shorter, I wrote, "Dad had a health scare. He asked me to tell you instead of reaching out himself. Because he didn't want it to feel like pressure. He's okay now. He said he's sorry. He said it the way people say things when they've stopped trying to explain themselves. I thought you should hear it." My brother replied in 2 weeks. "Thank you for telling me. I'm glad he's okay. Tell him I said that." That was all. But it was something. The December card that year was thicker than usual. Molly at 11, standing in front of a mountain range, her hair in a braid, laughing at something outside the frame. Beside her stood my brother. Beside my brother stood a woman I didn't recognize. Small, bright-eyed, one hand resting lightly on Molly's shoulder, easy and natural. On the back of the photo, in Molly's handwriting, neater now and more confident, were 4 words. I still remember snowflakes. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically, my legs just didn't hold me up anymore. My father found an announcement online a few months later. My brother had remarried. A small ceremony outdoors somewhere on the coast. My brother in a dark suit. Molly in a pale dress holding a small bouquet. The caption said, "We kept it small. Everything important was already there." I showed my father. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "Good, he needed that." His voice broke slightly on the last word. He covered it by taking a drink of his coffee. My mother passed away the following March. Stroke, very sudden on a Wednesday afternoon. After the first wave of practical things had been managed and the house was quiet, I found myself looking at the row of December photographs she'd kept in the hallway. 12 of them by then. 12 years of Molly, growing up in photos sent to a grandmother, who had lost her by her own family's choices. I called the number my brother had used once to confirm receipt of my second letter. I didn't expect him to answer. He answered on the third ring. "It's me," I said. A pause. "I know," he said. "Mom died. This morning." Another pause longer. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I'm sorry." I hadn't cried yet that day. I had been moving and doing and managing. But something about the carefulness in his voice, the way he was being precise and controlled in exactly the way I recognized. Because it was exactly the way he'd always managed things when he was trying not to fall apart. Broke something loose in me. "I'm not asking you to come," I said. He said, "Okay. She kept every photo you sent." He was quiet for a moment, then I know. Molly knew that too. "How?" "Because she asked me to send them." He paused. "She's been asking since she was 7. I closed my eyes. "She asked if she could write something on the one this year," he said. "The snowflakes," I said. "Yeah." We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll think about the service. I'm not making a promise." "I know," I said. "Thank you for answering." He came. He drove up from the airport with his wife and Molly, who was 15 by then, tall and composed and quiet in a way that looked like him. I saw them from across the chapel before the service began. My father saw them at the same moment. He reached out and grabbed my arm without saying anything. My brother made his way toward us. His wife stayed back slightly, close to Molly, and I saw the way Molly looked at her when she was uncertain. Not at my brother, at her. The way a kid looks at the parent who has been steady longest. My brother stopped in front of my father first. They looked at each other. My father put his hand out. My brother shook it. Then my father pulled him in, briefly, the way men from that generation do, when they mean something they can't say. My brother let him. Then he turned to me. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I said the only true thing I had. "I'm glad you came." He nodded. She would have wanted Molly here. I looked at my niece. She was watching me with eyes that were neutral. Not hostile, not warm, just observing. She looked like someone who had been given a factual and non-editorialized version of events, and was forming her own opinion about the rest. I said, "Hi, Molly." She said, "Hi." Composed. Careful. She looked like someone who knew how to be in a room where things were complicated, and I thought, my brother taught her that. My brother, who had always known how to be in rooms where things were complicated, had raised a daughter who could do the same, and I felt, for the first time, something that wasn't grief or guilt, but a kind of exhausted respect. At the graveside afterward, my brother came and stood beside me, just beside me without speaking. We watched my father lay flowers down. After a while my brother said, "She made a hard thing harder for me. But she wasn't a bad person." "I know," I said. "Neither are you probably." He said it, to some point in the middle distance, not quite to me. "But what you did was bad. And what they did was bad. And I needed you all to know that before anything else." "I've known it for a long time," I said. He nodded. "I know you do." We stood there. Then he said, "Leo." I looked at him. "I'd like Molly to know her brother," he said. "If that's something you want." I didn't trust myself to speak for a second. "Yeah," I finally said. "That's something I want." He said, "Okay, we'll figure it out slowly." The first video call between Leo and Molly happened 3 months later, on a Sunday afternoon. Leo was 12. Molly was 15. I set up the laptop at the kitchen table. And Leo sat down in front of it in his hockey jersey, and I clicked the link my brother had sent. And the screen opened up to show Molly, sitting at a kitchen counter in a house, with a lot of natural light somewhere on the coast. They looked at each other in silence. Then Molly said, "You're wearing a Leafs jersey." Leo said, "Yeah." Molly said, "I'm a Canucks fan." Leo made a face. "That's rough." Molly laughed, an unexpected laugh, sudden and genuine, and covered her mouth for a second, surprised by it. "You have my nose," she said. Leo touched his nose. "My dad says that too." They talked for 22 minutes about hockey, about school, about whether the Rockies were better than the Great Lakes, about a video game. Leo was into that. Molly had apparently played the previous summer. I sat off to the side, out of frame. My brother was somewhere behind Molly, also out of frame. Two fathers holding very still, not interfering. When the call ended, Leo looked at me and said, "She's cool." "Yeah," I said, "she is." He went back to his room. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. I don't know what comes next. My brother and I text sometimes, short, careful exchanges, nothing that reaches too far too fast. Molly and Leo talk every few weeks. My brother's wife sends me a recipe occasionally, through my brother, for things Leo might like. Last month it was a butter chicken that Leo said was the best thing he'd ever eaten and asked for every night that week. I thanked her, through my brother. She replied, "Tell him I'm glad." That's the shape of things. Small. Not restored, because some things don't restore, they just slowly stop bleeding. I spent years wanting someone else to absorb the weight of what I'd done. My parents, time, my brother's eventual softening. I spent years calling that process moving forward, when what it actually was standing still and hoping the distance between me and what I'd done would eventually feel like progress. My brother did not move forward. He moved away, and he built something clean and entirely his own. And he did not let the people who had hurt him into it until he was ready, on his own timeline, and nobody else's. When you are the one who caused the damage, the kindest thing is not to reach for forgiveness. The kindest thing is to earn the right to be in the same room, without the other person having to brace themselves. That takes years, maybe more, and there are no guarantees. But Leo has a sister, and she sends him voice memos sometimes, long ones, completely unprompted, about the Canucks blowing a third period lead, or a book she read, or something that happened at school that made her think of something he'd said. He plays them with his headphones in, lying on his bedroom floor, and sometimes I hear the shape of her voice and her laugh through the speaker from the hallway. That is the mercy. Not mine. I forfeited my right to that a long time ago. Theirs. Two kids who never asked to be born into a family shaped by someone else's worst choices, finding their way to each other anyway. I'm trying finally to deserve the fact that I get to watch it.